Alright guys, everybody, good morning. It is Saturday, July 25th, 2026, a little after 8 o'clock in the morning, and this is my first real official video. So what I'm going to do for this video is I'm going to discuss the current state of the MCU. So first off, like I said, 8 o'clock in the morning, Saturday, I'm actually headed over to the Moto Guzzi dealer, which is about 45 minutes away, because I have to get my service light reset. So you can see on the dashboard there's a little wrench, and what that basically means is that the computer says that it's time to do the service. Now, a little backstory: I bought this bike in July of 25, June 25, sorry, and then I had it for 3 weeks, and then on July 10th, 2025, a little after 6 o'clock in the afternoon, I was riding on a back road, and I came around a corner, and there was a deer. She was in the side of the road. I was hoping she'd stay there, but she jumped out in front of me with about 15 to 20 feet in front of me. I was not able to avoid her. I hit her dead on, killed her actually, but surprisingly stayed on the bike. Didn't do a lot of damage to myself. I have a scar on my left knee, and my right thumb kind of has a permanent swelling on it from some tendon pulling. But that's pretty much. But I walked away from it. Bike was only 3 weeks old, therefore it was new enough that the insurance covered to repair it. So my so the bike did get repaired under insurance. I didn't get it back until February of 2026 this year, mainly because they were waiting on the parts from Italy. That's one of the downsides, is when you ride Italian bikes, parts are not readily available, and it takes a while to get them if they're not in stock locally. They literally had to wait for a bag of screws to attach the instrument cluster. So because of that, what happened is that the odometer, even though I had 411 miles on it at the time of the accident, they were unable to reset the odometer to the current mileage or wouldn't tell the computer that. So what ended up happening was, when they replaced the instrument cluster, it put it back to zero, even though I technically had 411 miles on the bike. So what I did was I waited until the actual timing of the of the service. I had it done last month, so it was a little about 1,000 miles on the engine, even though the odometer read 600. And they weren't sure if the odometer, if the light was gonna, or the icon there was gonna trip, because of they didn't know. So they said, hey, if the maintenance indicator trips, just bring it back to us, and we will go ahead and we will reset it for you. So I called them yesterday and I said, hey, can I swing by in the morning and just have you guys reset the trip odometer, or not the trip odometer, the maintenance light for me? They're like, yeah, sure, bring it in. So I decided it was a good time to make my first official motovlog. And again, like I said, for this one, I'm going to touch on something that I kind of mentioned yesterday. The intro video, was actually recorded yesterday on the 24th. So, but I kind of touched on the current state of the MCU, and I think it's a good starting conversation, mainly because it has had a very tumultuous beginning and end so far, of what's been going on with it. A little backstory for me. So I'm a late Gen Xer, Zennial usually sometimes called. So I got into comics and what have you in my early teens. So I was in the late 80s, early 90s. I was really big into Marvel comics. And the reason I think that was because I was a huge child of the 80s, therefore I read Transformers comics, which were done by Marvel, so I kind of already knew kind of like the Marvel format, Marvel, idea, so that was the kind of the one that I knew. Plus, on TV, other than like Batman or Superman, there wasn't a lot of DC exposure. Maybe the Super Friends, but I didn't really watch that. So, for me, the comics I read in the late 80s, early 90s was Iron Man and X-Men mainly. Got big into the X books, but Iron Man was always a favorite as well. As I had mentioned in my intro video, that I've always, my favorite character is Iron Man, mainly because someone has enough intelligence, money, anyone could basically become Iron Man, which I like that idea, right? You're not stuck to some supernatural powers, being an alien, or hit with gamma radiation or whatever. So, for me, I really do enjoy, more grounded in reality superheroes. As much as they can be, right? So obviously I've always been a Marvel fan for the most part, more Marvel than DC, right? So wanting, obviously, as we all know, the early, in the 80s and 90s, like even the early 2000s with the X-Men movie, they weren't the greatest comic book adaptations. They always take very much liberties with the source material. They always, modified it enough to make it more movie direct, but yet, at the end of the day, it kind of, was never as comic accurate as it could be. It was great for the moviegoers, but not so much for the comic diehards. So I remember back in the, I want to say 2005, 2006, I'm not sure what, they did the Marvel Cinematic Universe animated, if anyone remembers those, where I think Lionsgate did it. And they had 8 movies that were kind of interconnected for the animation. They had Avengers, they had Iron Man, they had Hulk versus, they had a Thor movie, and it was kind of like the animated version of them. And I remember, really getting those, watching those, really enjoying those. I think those are the first kind of comic accurate movies, even though they were animated. It made me really feel like, they had a good grasp on the source material, and it was, a movie based on comics. So when Iron Man came out in 2008, I was very, very, very much into wanting to go see that. Like, this is before when Iron Man was, a B-list character, because they, sold the rights away to Spider-Man, the X-Men, Fantastic Four, so they didn't have any of their heavy hitters anymore because they'd sold them for, the movie rights to give money, because of, that's a whole thing about, how Marvel was hemorrhaging money and they went to bankruptcy and all that kind of stuff. So, so they used the Avengers, and that's like who they had left, kind of. But for me, it was exciting because I really liked Iron Man, and I was happy to see him on the big screen, and finally technology come up to where that it actually did the character justice. And I will say this, I've never gone to a midnight premiere movie ever. I did go to a midnight movie for Iron Man, so that's how much I enjoy that character. So yeah, obviously went to it. It was a surprise hit, as everyone knows. They really weren't expecting much, but hey, it did better than they thought. They did the after credits tease and whatever. I think they did. I'm trying to remember that on the original Iron Man movie. But then they had the Hulk, which didn't do as well, but it still set up the Avengers, and obviously they knew they had a hit with Iron Man, so they did the Iron Man 2, which, despite people's, reservations about that movie, I actually enjoyed it. I think it was a lot better than Iron Man 3. I was not really a fan of that one, but, that was kind of the building blocks and started the momentum, And then we got, Thor and Captain America, and kind of it brought everyone together, and it started making people really excited for the Avengers, right? So you ended up having this world building that was done, and I remember being giddy when I was, watching Thor, and they had, Hawkeye in it for the first time, and, I was like, oh, they're getting the team together, and then obviously Avengers came out in 2012, a smash hit, as everyone knows, really good written, a lot of fun, it had the humor, it had the action, just a really, really good movie. few movies after that obviously didn't hit as well, like The Dark World. Like I said, Iron Man 3 I was not a huge fan of. So there was all the different projects they had done that were kind of hit or miss, but they did well enough the box office to continue the universe and move on. So going forward now, obviously we've had some good, we had some winners, and they brought in, they had the Civil War, which I think was an incredibly well done, incredibly well done movie. Hot take, was not a huge fan of the Winter Soldier, mainly because I'm not a huge fan of spy espionage stuff, and like I said, I didn't really like the direction it went. I was watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. at the time, so I really wasn't a huge fan of what they did, but that's just me. I know that I'm in the minority there of not, I liked it, but as a standalone movie, I don't like what it did for what it did for for the remainder of the MCU for a while with the Hydra stuff. Just overplayed, I think. But what I also liked was I was very excited for Age of Ultron, mainly because Ultron is one of my favorite comic book characters. Again, robotics, that's a big thing for me. But and I thought it was decent. I think they did Ultron incorrectly. I think they gave him, number one, they humanized him too much, which, in my opinion, Ultron should not really be humanized, because he pretty much doesn't like humanity for the most part. So, but again, that's my take. I wasn't a huge fan of the facial character designs of Ultron. I liked actually his minions better, because they look like the Ultron drones actually look like Ultron, and I kind of like that. So, but again, my take. So obviously, as the MCU keeps going along, everything comes out, and they start getting Spider-Man. They start getting, they start doing the Guardians of the Galaxy, like even the smaller properties that they brought up, because people just started trusting the MCU, because they just figure, hey, this is another one, let me go ahead and watch this. Ant-Man and everything else. They kept all these smaller tier characters that not a lot of mainstream people are going to know, but they were able to get in that mainstream, which was that lightning in a bottle, where you got the mainstream people that were watching the movies, even though they didn't really know a lot about the characters. They're like, hey, this is a Marvel movie, there's going to be humor and it's going to be action, let's go to the movie theaters and watch it, right? So it worked for the time, did well. Marvel's sitting on top of the world, and they start taking liberties with some of the characters, which then brings it back to the whole idea of the reason why a lot of people didn't like the X-Men or the Fantastic Four or whatever, is because they took too much liberties with the source material. And and honestly, I understand when they say, well, this happens in the comics, but if you're going to do the comics, do the traditional origin stories, do the traditional characters, in my opinion, because that's what everyone grew up and loved, not some one-off, one shot, whatever. So I think they should just do the classic stuff, but again, that's me. So obviously we all know, Infinity War and Endgame came out, massive hits, the culmination of a decade of us watching and getting to know these characters, did incredibly well. I am one of those people that thinks Infinity War is a lot better than Endgame, mainly because I think there was more action. It kind of does the whole Empire Strikes Back idea, where it's the middle act, but it's on a downer, and the stakes are real high, right? Plus, I'm not a huge fan of time travel type movies or stuff, so that's where kind of Endgame kind of lost me. It's a little bit boring, even though I think that the final battle was amazing. I just think I like Infinity War as a standalone movie. I liked it better. So after, obviously, Endgame comes out, they have the plans to do the Kang Dynasty, and they have plans to go the multiversal war and stuff, and we all know what happened there with Jonathan Majors and how that kind of got sidelined, so now the MCU is kind of in flux. Plus, you end up having, COVID that kind of changed the perception and how people went to see movies. It kind of changed the whole movie, landscape in an instant kind of thing. So now no one is going out and packing the movie theaters now to watch these big movies because they're going to be released on streaming or digital like a month or two later. Whereas before it'd be many, many months and you'd have to wait. You'd have to go see them in the theater run, or you'd be out of them for a while. But nowadays they realize that there's so much money to be had from the streamers and the people that don't want to go to movies anymore that, a lot of times for a lot of movies, I wait till they're on streaming. A lot less money, more convenient in my house. I have a decent home theater set up, the 7.1 surround sound, a big 75-inch television, and nothing, over the top or anything, but, it's a lot more comfortable in my easy chair, with a nice bathroom right around the corner, and a lot cheaper snacks than going to the theater and, spending, $15 on a matinee now, especially when you go and you got, multiple people, I have a girlfriend with 2 kids, so for 4 of us to go to the movie theater, that's well easily $100 price point, right? That's a lot of money for a movie, and you can buy it in digital for a fraction of that cost at the end of the day, and just sit there and watch it at your own leisure in your house. So yeah, obviously the landscape has changed. They've had a few good hitters, they've had a few good ones with did the Spider-Mans obviously do well. The Last Guardians did well, but then he had some misses like the Eternals, and going down that whole path of, like the Marvels, Captain Marvel did well, but, the Marvels did not, and, Tai-Chi did pretty well, but and then obviously I think also the dilution of some of those TV shows too. Some of them were pretty decent. I actually liked WandaVision mainly because I was a huge Vision fan. I enjoyed what was it? I enjoyed Captain America and the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I enjoyed that one. I enjoyed the Hawkeye movie, the TV show. But again, some of them diluted, especially what was it? With the different, some of the shows that I haven't watched, and I think that's diluting the brand as well, because now you're just it's overconsumption, right? Star Wars is kind of suffering from the same thing, where there's just too much media available for you, and it's like you gotta. There's one thing where you have to watch all the movies that keep up, when you have to start watching all the TV shows and everything. It's just a lot of time sink for the casual people that they don't necessarily want to put into it. They want to go see a 2.5-hour movie and that's it. Not watch multiple episode series arcs and what these characters are on a Disney Plus television show. I like Loki, for example. I think that was a pretty good, well done show. I was really excited for that one. So again, hit or misses. And for the most part, if anything I didn't watch, I'm pretty sure I can do a quick catch-up online to know, so I'll understand who the characters are when I go see Doomsday and whatever, but I'm pretty sure I'm pretty well versed. But yeah, getting back to my initial thing about the MCU, for Doomsday, I was very excited for it because, I like Doctor Doom. I like that they're going more, characters, again, that aren't the traditional known characters. Like, yeah, Doctor Doom is a very big Marvel villain and stuff, but for most casual people, they don't really know who he is. So you kind of have to build who that is. I remember when we watched the Avengers and they had the teaser trailer of Thanos, and the comic book characters knew exactly who Thanos was and knew they were doing the Infinity Saga, the Infinity Gauntlet. But yet the casual people are like, who the hell's that smiling? It's you gotta think about your audience, right? So I think, again, that's why I think they brought back Robert Downey Jr. as Doom, is because everyone's gonna remember him as Iron Man and as to get butts in seats. Doing this as a variant of Tony Stark. I understand understand why they're doing it. I understand why, it'll probably work decently in the MCU, just as a self-contained universe. But, in the comics, I really wish they'd done Victor Von Doom and actually given him a proper intro and kind of just had him as a character. But again, I understand why they did it. It's the draw. It's the reason why they're bringing Steve Rogers back, because I think the new Captain America with, I don't think it's hitting his audiences as heavily as Marvel had hoped. So, again, what do? You bring back the people that made it, that made the money, and say, okay, let's give you what you really want. And people go see it for the nostalgia of seeing, because it's been what now? It's 7 years since Endgame hit. So, these people are clamoring for Tony Stark, for Steve Rogers. They kept Thor there. They kind of made him way too comedic, though, and I'm glad that it looks like they're going back to a more serious tone for Thor. I do like that. So hopefully that'll pay out well. But we'll see how that goes. I have hesitant hopes that the movie will be good, that it'll do good service, that it'll at least be an entertaining film. I hope not disappointed. I hope that they kind of bring back the magic that made the MCU great. I will be seeing that in the theater. That one brand new day. There are a few that I will see in the theater, but we will see how that one goes. And obviously I plan on doing my thoughts eventually on a video. Obviously it's December and I'm upstate New York, so for that one there, it'll definitely be the WRX, maybe through a snowstorm, who knows. But I will definitely be doing my thoughts on that one when that comes out. But let me know in the comments. I mean, if you're, like I said, this is my very first video, so who knows how many people are actually going to watch this. But give me feedback. Let me know what you think. Again, this is just ramblings of a motorcycle and car loving nerd, and I just figured the MCU is a good topic to pick because it's in all of our collective mindsets now. So yeah, alright guys, well, other than that, I hope you guys have a great day, and I will catch you on the next one. Thanks.